I'd like to speak with you tonight about a 2,000-year-old concept that is as relevant and radical and world-changing today as I'm sure it was 2,000 years ago. In the Jewish tradition, it's called Tikkun Olam. I don't know if I've pronounced it correctly in the Hebrew, but basically the meaning of it is that our role is to help repair the world, to help heal the world through acts of loving kindness and compassion. It's usually played out in practical terms, social justice, sort of addressing people's practical needs as a way of manifesting the love and compassion of God in the world. In the Catholic tradition, which is what I grew up in, we talked about corporal acts of mercy. And again, the calling upon the person of faith is to share the mercy and compassion of God in the world to those in need. And we're certainly all in need at one time or another. But I'd like to tell you a few stories that I've gathered from my 30 plus years of reporting on HIV and on LGBTQ issues, particularly stories that emerged from my reporting on AIDS beginning in 1986. John Paul Barnage, the man that I interviewed for my book Victory Deferred in 1995 and who has since passed away. But John Paul was a young attorney in Houston at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic in the early 1980s. And he described to me how when he was in law school, he did a Fulbright fellowship in India. And while he was there, he visited one of Mother Teresa's homes for the poor. And he said that on the wall, someone had painted the words, "God is love in action." And he said he wasn't a religious type, but that for him, that was a version of God that he could live with. So John Paul Barnage proceeded in the years up till his death to play out love in action, to put his love in action, defending the legal rights of very vulnerable people with AIDS. He described some of the earliest cases that he saw in Houston that he was involved with. And the things that he saw and described were pretty typical of things that I heard in interviews with others around the country. Parents who had rejected their gay sons, and one young man in particular who died at 21 years old. And when John Paul Barnage called the father, when he tracked down the father and asked what to do with the body, the father said, put it in a hefty bag and put it out to the curb. That is the contrast against which the love in action of someone like John Paul Barnage, not necessarily a believer or a practitioner of any specific religion, but definitely a skilled practitioner of human decency, which Albert Camus said is the essence, that is heroism, is doing the right thing simply because it's the right thing to do. And we've seen that time and time again throughout the years of the AIDS epidemic, people stepping forward to take care of friends and neighbors and family members and co-workers, and to raise money and to walk in marches and ride in bike-a-thons. Just this incredible outpouring of charity in the real sense of caritas, divine love manifested in the world through acts of loving kindness that include things like walking in marches, raising money for an AIDS organization or for a refugee organization, volunteering as an AIDS buddy, doing practical things. Those are corporal acts of mercy, if you want to use churchy kind of language for them. But they really are about human decency. In New York, at former St. Vincent's Hospital, used to be St. Vincent's at the corner of, 7th Avenue and 13th Street, right next to the LGBTQ community center, interestingly enough. Well, at St. Vincent's, which was present in Greenwich Village, which was devastated by AIDS, starting in the early 80s. Sister Patrice Murphy, a Catholic nun, created and led until the end of the 90s, I guess, I think when she retired, the bereavement group for survivors of people who had died from AIDS. And these were, in Greenwich Village, largely gay men who had died from AIDS. So the survivors were their partners and their friends and their neighbors and people who had been traumatized by these experiences of losing their loved ones. And Sister Patrice, when I interviewed her a couple of different times, she made clear that her role was to provide care and compassionate services and to listen to people and comfort them in their grief. That she wasn't there as a moralist or a judge. She was living out her faith through these acts of mercy and compassion and being there with people at their most difficult times, regardless of their sexual orientation. That didn't matter. That was beside the point. In Los Angeles, Reverend Carl Bean, African-American minister, was a disco singer in the 70s. He was a Motown artist. He recorded a song titled Born This Way, long before Lady Gaga did. Different song, but same title. And Carl Bean, in the early 80s, at the beginning of the AIDS epidemic in Los Angeles, was traversing the city of LA by bus and subway, ministering to black gay men dying from AIDS, who were closeted, who were shamed, who were living their lives on what we came to know as the down low. And he would assure them of God's love for them and that their illness was not some kind of divine judgment against them for being gay. Carl Bean formed the Unity Fellowship, the first LGBT Christian denomination for people of color, LGBTQ people of color. And as a ministry of Unity Fellowship, he founded the Minority AIDS Project in South Central Los Angeles. And he said that it wasn't enough for him to work on AIDS and to care about AIDS by working side by side with white gay men in West Hollywood. He said, no, I had to go back to my community, my neighborhood, and minister to my people. And Carl Bean showed in his actions, in his faith, his love in action, what God looks like in a really bad neighborhood in Los Angeles. I visited the Minority AIDS Project. He, again, is another example of showing the world through actions, acts of kindness and compassion, practical care, what God looks like, what love looks like in human life. Another example that I have, and this one I'm going to read a little bit because there are a couple quotations from her that I'd really like to read. When Sharon Kleinbaum became the first rabbi for CBST, Congregation B'T Simchat Torah, in New York, the largest LGBT Jewish synagogue in the United States, and I expect maybe the world. It was at the height of the AIDS epidemic. Rabbi Kleinbaum described to me in our interview for Stonewall Strong that 40% of the men in her congregation died from AIDS. 40%. When I interviewed her in early 2016, the CBST had just opened a new building in Manhattan, and so she gave me the grand tour of it. And at the back of the sanctuary was a wall, a memorial wall, with names carved in it of all the men from the congregation who had died from AIDS. It was really moving. to say the least. Rabbi Kleinbaum described her experience early on ministering to Jewish men who were suffering from AIDS and back then dying from AIDS. And she described a couple examples that were just so powerful. She described ministering to a Jewish man who was closeted and was married to a woman and who was dying from AIDS and who was convinced that this was God's judgment on him, that he deserved to die. That's what he really believed, that he had done something wrong and he was being punished and he deserved it. Rabbi Kleinbaum said, I spent a lot of time with people from that kind of background, trying to convince them to believe in a different kind of God. Kleinbaum told me that she believes CBST and other progressive faith communities have an important role in helping people not to give up on religion, but to transform it, to become a different kind of religion, like the different kind of God that she talked about. And this religion takes doing justice seriously. Rabbi Kleinbaum said, when I came here, I had to fight with Jewish funeral homes to bury anyone who died from AIDS with dignity. They were burying them in plastic body bags, which is against Jewish custom and law. Here's the most powerful, I thought, example of the difference between a faith that is hung up on black and white, sort of text-driven meaning of what it means to be a person of faith and what it means actually to live it and to practice it. Rabbi Kleinbaum said, I did a wedding before it was legal for a congregant who's dying from AIDS. He couldn't get out of bed, and his partner sat next to him on his hospital bed. A deli platter was brought into the hospital room. He died a few days later. The dignity and love and sense of humanity in that hospital room was spectacular. It was so inspiring, such a hopeful feeling of being powerful, not victims. LGBTQ people of faith, people who put our love in action in practical ways, do justice, have mercy, show compassion through our actions, through the organizations we support with our time and treasure and talent. We are showing love in action. And it seems to me, by that definition, that John Paul Barnage saw painted on a wall in Mother Teresa's Home to the Poor in India, we are in fact showing the world what God looks like. And if that sounds grand, then God is grand. And it's something really to think about and something to really take great pride in, and a different way, a different dimension of our LGBTQ pride, that those of us who sort of live out our lives with faith as an important component of them, this is something that we can really take to heart, and to know that we are making a difference and being, in Christian terms, the salt of the earth by showing love in action and thereby helping to heal the world one compassionate action at a time. Thank you.